Hi folks, today I'm going to be walking you through my process for painting up this zombie shark. Okay, so this is a zombie undead shark from the Reaper Bones line, and I've gone ahead and just used a drill to kind of pin this since there was no base to this guy, and I needed something to hold it. It's a little hard to see because it's clear glue, but I filled in, there were a couple of gaps around the mouth as well as the fins. So I went ahead and based this all in a white primer. I used a brush-on primer. You could use a spray-on primer. And now I'm going in with some contrast to paint in the bloody bits. I oftentimes like to start out painting in the crevices. I just find it's easier to kind of get my brush in there and do all of that, and I don't have to worry as much about getting it, on the surface of the rest of the mini. It kind of depends, but this kind of mini, I looked at it and said, yeah, it's going to be a lot easier to do this inside bit first, especially because I knew I was going to want to use the red contrast. Alright, so now that I've got that all painted in, I'm going to go through and paint in the body and just base it in. I'm basing it in the Fang. I just took this onto my wet palette. I did add a little bit of water, probably about 2-to-1 paint to water ratio. And I'm going to base this whole thing. I did go through and this actually took me 2 to 3 layers. 2 layers over everything, and there were a couple spots that I went ahead and did a 3rd layer just to get a nice even base coat so that you can see all of that. Now I'm going to go through and add the underside, and this I took Pallid witch flesh and did about 2 to 1 water to paint. To start off with, I wanted to get a really watered down effect so that I could layer it over this blue, so that way the blue kind of still acts as the under color. And you can see, because I did water it down, it does fall into those cracks a lot, but I'll go through with a shade and kind of take care of that. So I'm just going through it and kind of freehanding in where the underbelly of this shark is. Now, I did look at a couple of pictures of great white sharks to get an idea of where the color should be. And I will suggest, if you're painting something that you can pull reference images from, that's always great. It's nice to have ideas, and that gives you a model to kind of base it off of. So now I went through, that's all dry. Now I'm going through with a 2nd layer, and this is 1-to-1 water to paint. And I'm going to go back through and hit kind of all of the high points, do the highlights on this underside. I have definitely been playing around a little bit more with trying to water down my paints and get consistency that works for what I'm doing, that's not just using it straight out of the bottle. And this does work, especially if you've got just kind of regular miniature paints. Now, specialty paints, you may or may not want to mess with it, like the contrast. You probably want to just use it straight out of the bottle. I've tried watering it down and it gets a bit weird. So that you can see, I've gone through and done a 2nd coat in that Pallid witch flesh. And now I'm going through with contrast black Templar to paint the eyes. I actually really liked, I was figuring I might have to go back in and do some more touch-ups with the eyes, but I liked the kind of dead glassy eye look that this gave. And then for the other eye, since that eye is actually missing, it's an empty socket, I was a bit heavier with the contrast here to really let that be just a dead empty socket. Now I do go through, I don't think I actually remembered to film this, and just touched up, did a little like light point on the dead eye, just to emphasize that there is still an eye there, even if it's dead. So now I'm going through with contrast Shyish purple and painting in some of the organs. I wanted to give a little bit of difference between a few of the organs, and I started out with this lighter purple and found it just kind of didn't make that big of a difference. You know, if you're looking at it really up close, you can tell, but when it's down on the table, you know, from an arm's length away, you can't really see it. So then I went through with Magos purple. You can see some of it already on the mini, and now I'm going through and adding more just to bring out some contrast between some of the organs, as well as to make some of it look like it's kind of already dead, that dead decaying meat in there. I had fun playing around with the colors. I'm not being super precise with where I place this to kind of give it a bit of that blotchy, rotting flesh look that, you know, you want a zombie to have. It's not going to be all nice and clean and neat. It's going to have parts that are, you know, the rot is spreading. All right, so now I'm going through and I've added 2-to-1 of the Fang and Pallid witch flesh. Mixed that all together, watered it down. So it's probably 1 part the Fang, 1 part witch flesh, and 1 part water. And I'm going through and painting in all of the highlight just to bring out a little bit more dimension to this blue, kind of accentuate some of the folds in this model. I do like that there's a bit of movement with those folds, as well as it kind of helped bring out some of the ridges around these gashes and gouges where something, who knows what, has taken a giant bite out of this zombie shark. Are there more zombie sharks? And was it like a zombie bear that attacked a zombie shark? Who knows? Make it your own in your game. So yeah, I went through, painted this all on, and then I let this dry really well because the next step that I'm going to do, I didn't want to be smudging the paint. That's a big thing, you know, make sure you let your paint dry. Work on a couple minis at a time or find spots to step away. So now that that's dry, you can see that does bring out a little bit more contrast. And now I'm going to go through and bring the shadows back in, and I'm using Drakenhof Nighshade to do that. So this nice, very dark blue ink. Started out on the white parts, wanting to bring back those gills, kind of bring out the shade, shadow, folds, all of that stuff, and then painting it into most of the blue bits as well. Just adding some more dimension here. Now, if you really wanted to up this, you could go back, the contrast between the different shades, you could go back in with your Fang and Pallid Witch Flesh mixture to hit the highlights. I didn't end up doing that because I felt it looked pretty good where it was. But I am going to go back over the underside to bring some of the highlights on the white back up. It just kind of muddied it down a little bit more than I wanted it to, but I was happy with the blue-gray. Okay, so now you can see that's fully dried. I definitely stepped away for like probably an hour to really let that dry. And now I'm going back through with Pallid Witch Flesh. This is just Pallid Witch Flesh with a little bit of water in it. Taking it on my wet palette and just bringing back some of those high points that the shade got into. I did try to be kind of careful not to get too much of that shade covered up. Tried to leave it, which is also another reason of watering down your paints so that you're doing those thin layers, kind of let the different layers and paints kind of slowly build up on each other. All right, so now that that's done, I'm going to go through and start adding some bringing out these wounds and taking some contrast Magos purple through and kind of just making this flesh, especially around the wounds, but also there's, some like bites and cuts, not as deep on the fins here, and just kind of bringing a little bit of this purple in to make it look like, bruised flesh, perhaps like infected, flesh that a little bit of inflamed around there. I also went through and did kind of the same method that you're seeing here, where I'm just kind of blotching it on, not being super precise, but letting the contrast kind of fall into those cracks and stuff. Also with Creed Camo, and hey, you can see that's already on there, to bring kind of that gross green, like rotting element of it. If you were now I'm going through with Emperor's Child to do the mouth. But yeah, if you wanted to just have more of a bruised effect, stick with purple and maybe bring in a little bit of yellow. But I thought the green, especially on top of the blue, would help give that kind of more rotting, dead look to it than just a bruised effect. But that's something to keep in mind. You know, if you've got somebody who, you know, you're painting up a mini that they were in a fist fight and they've got a bit of a black eye, it's not going to be just purple. There's going to be like some yellows and pinks in there. You know, look up pictures of bruises and black eyes to get ideas. So now that that's all painted in, that gives us, you know, that mouth looks quite a bit better. All right, so the last step that I'm going to do is I'm going to paint in the bones and the teeth. And what I'm doing is I'm priming this back to white because I'm going to use Skeleton Horde Contrast to do the bones. I find it just looks, it's such an easy step to just use the contrast paint. I really can't do, at my level, can't do bones better, and especially for some of these smaller areas, it just looks great. So I primed in white to bring back the white color so that the contrast can do its thing. And now I'm just painting that all over the bones. I'm also going to hit up the teeth. You know, you can see if I hold the mini in the right place. Bring the teeth down a little bit. They were a little too white. And if you want to add a little bit more dimension, you could also go back in with white and add kind of the high points there. So yeah, there you have it. That is all good. Now I'm just going to let this dry and show you the final pictures. So there you have our zombie shark. It looks disgusting, which is what you want a zombie to look like. I had a great time painting this guy up, and it really only took me a couple of hours to do, and you know, that also included a couple of times of stepping away to let the paint dry. And if you do paint up this mini or use any of the techniques, I'd love to see pictures of your finished work. Feel free to tag us on social media and we'll let you know what we think. A big thanks to our patrons, especially Sean. If you want to support our channel, you can head over to our Patreon page and check out the perks of being a patron. And hopefully you can use some of these techniques to paint up your own zombie shark or any undead minis that you're painting. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to subscribe because we make videos here every week about tabletop RPGs and our other geeky interests, and miniatures too. Alright, I'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye! Zombie shark do 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 do. That has been stuck in my head the entire time I've been painting this mini.